They called Julian Thorne the man who couldn't lose. He had the billion-dollar hedge fund, the penthouse on Park Avenue, and the silent trophy wife who stood perfectly still in his shadow. But everyone missed the most dangerous thing in the room. Her silence wasn't submission. It was preparation. At 9:00 p.m., she walked out of the darker corner of the Diamond Gala. By 9:00 a.m., Julian didn't just lose his wife, he lost his fortune, his reputation, and his freedom. This is the story of the most brutal, calculated revenge in New York history. Watch until the end to see how the perfect crime was legal. The flashbulbs outside the Pierre Hotel were blinding, popping in a rhythmic, aggressive staccato that Julian Thorne lived for. He stepped out of the black Maybach, buttoning his bespoke Tom Ford tuxedo jacket with one hand, while the other gripped the slender, trembling wrist of his wife Elena. "Smile!" Julian hissed through his teeth, barely moving his lips. "And for God's sake, stand up straight. You look like a frightened deer. You're the wife of a billionaire, not a charity case." Elena forced the corners of her mouth upward. It was a practiced expression, one she had perfected over 7 years, of a marriage that felt less like a partnership and more like a hostage situation. She wore a vintage emerald necklace, a piece Julian had bought at a Christie's auction, not for her, but for the tax write-off. "I'm trying, Julian," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the screaming paparazzi calling out Julian's name. "Try harder," he snapped, pulling her up the red carpet. Julian Thorne was the CEO of Thorne Capital, a hedge fund that had just posted record profits by shorting a pharmaceutical company, right before a scandal broke. A scandal, many whispered. Julian had manufactured himself. He was 45, handsome in a predatory way, and utterly convinced of his own invincibility. Inside the ballroom, the air smelled of expensive perfume and old money. The elite of New York society were circling each other. Julian immediately dropped Elena's hand to greet Senator Maxwell, a man whose re-election campaign Julian was heavily funding. "Senator, good to see you." Julian boomed, his charm turning on like a light switch. Elena took a step back, fading into the background. This was her role, the silent ornament. She watched as a tall, striking woman in a daring red dress approached the circle. It was Sophia Laurent, Julian's chief financial officer, and as everyone in the room, except perhaps Elena, seemed to know his mistress. "Julian," Sophia purred, placing a hand on his arm that lingered a second too long. "The Asian markets are opening soon. We should check the numbers later." Julian smirked, his eyes undressing her. "Of course. Business never sleeps." Elena felt a cold, hard knot in her stomach, but her face remained impassive. She caught the eye of a waiter and took a glass of champagne, gripping the stem so hard her knuckles turned white. She watched them. The way Julian leaned in, the way Sophia laughed at a joke that wasn't funny. They thought she was stupid. They thought she was just the poor librarian Julian had plucked from obscurity, a pretty thing with no claws. They were wrong. At 9:30 p.m., the gala was in full swing. Julian was holding court near the orchestra, laughing loudly with a group of investors. Elena approached him. "Julian." He turned, annoyed. "What is it, Elena?" "I'm busy." "I have a migraine," she said softly, touching her temple. "The lights, they're too bright. I'm going to take the car back to the penthouse." Julian rolled his eyes, sighing theatrically for his audience. "Of course you do. You never could handle the real world, could you, Fine? Go. Send the driver back for me. I'll be late." "Okay," she said. She looked at him. Really looked at him for a long second. It was a look devoid of love, hate, or fear. It was just empty. "Goodbye, Julian." Yeah, goodbye." He waved her off, turning back to Sophia. Elena turned and walked away. She didn't rush. She walked with the measured grace of a woman who knew exactly where she was going. She retrieved her coat from the cloakroom, walked out the side exit to 61st Street, and climbed into the waiting Maybach. "Home, Mrs. Thorne?" the driver, a burly man named Gus, asked. "Actually, Gus." Elena said, her voice suddenly steady, the tremble completely gone. "Take me to Teterboro Airport. I've decided to visit my sister in Boston for a few days. Julian knows." Gus nodded. He didn't question her. Why would he? She was the meek, obedient wife. As the car merged into traffic, Elena reached into her clutch. She didn't pull out a compact or a lipstick. She pulled out a burner phone, a cheap Android she had bought with cash 6 months ago. She typed in a single code and hit send. On the screen, a progress bar appeared. "Executing script Prometheus. 0% complete." She watched the percentage tick up to 1%. "Drive a little faster, please, Gus," she said calmly. "I don't want to miss my flight." Julian stumbled into the penthouse at 3:00 a.m. He was drunk on vintage scotch and his own ego. Sophia had left 20 minutes earlier, taking a separate Uber to maintain appearances, though the lipstick stain on Julian's collar told a different story. "Elena!" he bellowed into the cavernous foyer. Silence. "Useless woman," he muttered, tossing his keys onto the marble console table. He loosened his tie and staggered toward them. The master bedroom. He expected to find her asleep, perhaps crying softly into her pillow as she often did. He liked it when she cried. It made him feel powerful. He pushed the door open. The bed was made. Perfectly pristine. The sheets were tight, the pillows fluffed. It hadn't been slept in. Julian frowned. "Elena." He checked the bathroom. Empty. He checked the guest rooms. Empty. A flicker of irritation rose in his chest. Had she actually gone to a hotel? If she had, he would cancel her credit cards in the morning. He would teach her a lesson about leaving without permission. He went to the walk-in closet to change. He froze. The closet was usually filled with Elena's modest collection of designer clothes, things he forced her to wear. But tonight it looked normal. Her dresses were there. Her shoes were lined up. But something was wrong. The spacing was off. He walked to the back of the closet, where the wall safe was hidden behind a painting of a seascape. He moved the painting. The safe door was closed. He punched in the code 0 to 5 1880. His birthday. The light turned red. Error. He frowned. He typed it again. Error. What the hell? He tried the master override code. Error. System lockdown initiated. Damn it! He kicked the wall. He was too drunk to deal with a malfunction. He decided to deal with Elena's tantrum in the morning. He stripped down to his boxers and collapsed onto the bed, passing out within seconds. He didn't hear the hum of the servers in his home office down the hall, suddenly spike the fans whirring as they processed terabytes of data. He didn't hear the notification ping on his phone, then another, then a cascade of them lighting up the dark room like strobe lights. Julian woke up at 8:15 a.m. to the sound of pounding. It wasn't a polite knock. It was a heavy, authoritative thudding against the front door of the penthouse. He groaned, his head throbbing. "Gus, get to the door!" he yelled. No answer. The house was dead silent, except for the pounding. Julian dragged himself out of bed. He grabbed his silk robe. "I'm coming, hold your horses." He marched to the front door, anger rising. He looked through the peephole and stopped dead. It wasn't the doorman. It wasn't room service. Standing in the hallway were 3 men in windbreakers. On the back of the jackets, in bold yellow letters, was the acronym FBI. Julian's heart hammered against his ribs. He unlocked the door. "Julian Thorne?" the lead agent asked. He was an older man with a face like carved granite. "Yes," Julian said, trying to summon his CEO voice. "Do you have any idea what time it is I'm calling my lawyer?" "You can do that, Mr. Thorne," the agent said, stepping into the foyer without waiting for an invitation. "I'm Special Agent Miller. We have a warrant for the seizure of all electronic devices and physical assets located in this residence." "Seizure on what grounds?" Julian demanded, backing up. "This is harassment, on the grounds of wire fraud, embezzlement, insider trading, and—" Agent Miller looked down at a clipboard, "violating the RICO Act." "That's insane." Julian laughed nervously. "My books are spotless. My CFO handles everything." "Your CFO, Ms. Sophia Laurent, was picked up by our team 20 minutes ago at her apartment," Miller said calmly. "She's already cooperating." The color drained from Julian's face. "Sophia. But that's not why we're here right this second. Mr. Thorne," Miller said, looking around the apartment. "We're also here regarding the welfare of your wife, Elena Thorne." "Elena?" Julian blinked. She's at her sister's, or a hotel. She had a migraine." Miller stared at him. "Mr. Thorne, we received an automated distress signal from this address at 3:00 a.m., indicating a domestic disturbance, followed by a data dump sent to the SEC, the DOJ, and the New York Times, seemingly from Mrs. Thorne's personal cloud account. The email contained a suicide note claiming she was afraid for her life because of what she knew about your business." "Suicide note," Julian whispered. No, she's fine. She's just playing games." "We found her car, Mr. Thorne," Miller said, his voice dropping an octave. "It was parked on the George Washington Bridge. The engine was running. Her purse and shoes were on the railing. We haven't found a body yet because the current is strong." Julian felt the room spin. The hangover vanished, replaced by cold terror. "She's not dead," Julian stammered. "She wouldn't. She doesn't have the guts." "Or maybe—" Miller stepped closer. "Someone helped her over the edge. We know about the mistress, Julian. We know about the offshore accounts in the Caymans, the ones that were emptied 5 hours ago. Every cent, Mr. Thorne. Transferred to untraceable crypto wallets." "Emptied?" Julian choked. "You have $0 in your operating accounts," Miller said, "and since the transfers were authorized by your biometric data, it looks like you're trying to run. That's why we're here to arrest you. You're a flight risk." "I didn't authorize anything," Julian screamed. "Tell it to the judge." Miller nodded to the agents behind him. "Cuff him." As the cold steel clicked around Julian's wrists, he looked wild-eyed around the penthouse. He looked at the family photo on the console table. Julian smiling. Elena looking down. She did this, a voice in his head screamed. The quiet mouse. She didn't just leave. She burned the house down. The interrogation room at the FBI field office in Lower Manhattan was a cold, windowless box that smelled of stale coffee and industrial cleaner. Julian Thorne sat at a metal table. His tuxedo shirt unbuttoned at the collar, the expensive fabric now wrinkled and stained with sweat. For 6 hours he had been demanding his lawyer, Marcus Sterling, a man who charged $1,500 an hour and had kept Julian out of jail twice before. But when Marcus finally arrived, he didn't look like the shark Julian remembered. He looked pale. "Get me out of here, Marcus." Julian snapped his voice hoarse. "This is a misunderstanding. Elena is having a breakdown. I did not kill her, and I certainly didn't steal my own money." Marcus sat down, placing his leather briefcase on the table with a heavy thud. He didn't open it. He just looked at Julian with a mixture of pity and disgust. "Julian," Marcus said quietly, "you need to listen to me very carefully. The situation has evolved." "Evolved how? Did they find her?" "No," Marcus said. "They found her diary." Julian scoffed. "Elena didn't keep a diary. She barely had a thought in her head that I didn't put there." Marcus slid a tablet across the table. "She kept a digital audio journal, Julian, uploaded to a cloud server that was set to auto-release to the district attorney in the event of her death or disappearance. It's been leaking to the press for the last hour. CNN is playing excerpts." Julian stared at the tablet. He pressed play on the file marked Entry 104.P3. Elena's voice filled the small room. It wasn't the meek whisper he was used to. It was trembling, terrified. "October 14th. He hit me again tonight. Not the face. He never hits the face because of the galas. He hit me in the ribs. He told me that if I ever tried to leave, he'd bury me under the foundation of the New Hamptons house. He said he has friends in the police. He said nobody would miss a librarian from Ohio. I'm so scared. I think he's moving money around. I saw him with Sophia. They were talking about liquidating assets and starting fresh. I think he's going to kill me to make space for her." The recording ended with the sound of muffled sobbing. Julian's mouth hung open. "That's a lie. I never hit her. I mean, I grabbed her arm sometimes, sure, but I never broke her ribs. And bury her, that's movie villain garbage." "It doesn't matter, Julian," Marcus said, loosening his tie. "Because the forensic accountants found the transfers. Billions of dollars moved from your accounts into shell companies that look like they belong to you and then vanished into the dark web. The IP addresses used to authorize the transfers, they trace back to your personal laptop, logged in with your retina scan at 2:45 a.m. last night." "I was asleep," Julian roared. "And can you prove that?" Marcus shot back. "Your wife is missing, presumed dead. She left a note saying you were going to kill her. Money is missing. Your mistress has admitted to the affair and told the feds you were planning to divorce Elena, but didn't want to split the fortune. The narrative is set, Julian. To the world, you're not a billionaire genius anymore. You're the Bluebeard of Wall Street. You murdered your wife to run away with your mistress and your money." "Sophia." Julian's eyes narrowed. "Sophia can vouch for me. She knows I didn't move that money." Marcus sighed, rubbing his temples. "Sophia Laurent signed a plea deal 20 minutes ago. She's claiming you coerced her into the fraud. She's throwing you to the wolves to save herself from a 20-year sentence. She told them about the insider trading the falsified reports, everything. She gave them the smoking gun emails." Julian felt the blood leave his extremities. "What emails?" "Emails from your account to her detailing the illegal shorts. Emails you sent last week." "I didn't send any emails," Julian screamed, slamming his fist on the table. "They came from your device Julian sent during hours you claim you were working late." Marcus stood up. "I can't represent you on this. The conflict of interest is too high, and frankly the firm is dropping you. Your assets are frozen. You can't pay me. Good luck with the public defender." Marcus walked out. Julian sat alone in the silence. The weight of it crushed him. He wasn't fighting a legal battle anymore. He was fighting a ghost. Eleanor had constructed a reality that was more convincing than the truth. The arraignment the next morning was a circus. The courthouse steps were swarmed with protesters holding signs that read, "Justice for Eleanor," and "Eat the rich." When Julian was led into the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit, shackles around his ankles, the gallery erupted in hisses. He scanned the room, looking for a friendly face. There was none. His board of directors, his friends, the politicians he had bribed, they were all gone. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named District Attorney Vance, didn't hold back. "Your Honor," Vance boomed, pointing a finger at Julian. "This man is a flight risk of the highest order. He has successfully hidden over $2 billion of stolen funds. He is the prime suspect in the disappearance and likely homicide of his wife. We request that bail be denied." Julian's public defender, a harried man named Mr. Klein, who smelled of cigarettes, stood up weakly. "Your Honor, the evidence is circumstantial. No body has been found." The judge, a stern man named Justice Halloway, a man Julian had once insulted at a golf tournament, peered over his glasses. "Mr. Thorne, given the massive financial resources you have apparently squirreled away and the grave nature of the threats recorded by the victim, I am remanding you to Rikers Island pending trial. Bail is denied." The gavel banged. It sounded like a gunshot. As the bailiffs dragged Julian away, he looked at the press gallery. A camera zoomed in on his face. He didn't look arrogant anymore. He looked like a trapped animal. And in a small, nondescript motel room 300 miles away, a woman watched the live stream on a burner tablet. She took a sip of cheap coffee, her eyes cold and dry. She whispered one word at the screen. "Karma." Rikers Island was a far cry from the penthouse at the Pierre. Julian was placed in protective custody, which meant solitary confinement, ostensibly for his own safety. But in reality, it was just another form of torture. For 3 days, Julian paced the 6x8 cell. He had no phone, no internet, no contact with the outside world, except for Mr. Klein, who brought only bad news. "They found blood in the trunk of the Maybach," Klein told him on the 4th day. "What?" Julian gripped the plexiglass divider. "That's impossible. I didn't touch her." "It's a match for Elena's DNA," Klein said, looking at his notes. "Just a few drops under the spare tire mat. The prosecution is theorizing you knocked her out. Put her in the trunk, drove her to the bridge, and tossed her over." "I didn't drive the car," Julian yelled. "Gus drove the car." "Gus is gone, Julian," Klein said. "The driver. He vanished the same night Elena did. The police think you paid him off to help you and then he skipped town. Or maybe you killed him too." Julian slumped back in his chair. It was perfect. It was too perfect. He closed his eyes and tried to think. He needed to think like the shark he used to be. How did she do it? Flashback 6 months ago. The memory hit him. It was a Tuesday. Julian had been working late in his home office. Elena had come in with a tray of tea. "Get out," he had snapped. "I'm entering the passkeys for the Cayman accounts. If I lose focus, I have to start over." "I'm sorry, Julian," she had said, bowing her head. She placed the tray on the edge of the desk. "I just wanted to make sure you were hydrated." She had lingered. Just for a moment. She had been wearing that stupid, clunky smartwatch he hated. The one she said she used to count her steps because she was trying to lose weight for him. He remembered now. As she set the tray down, her wrist had hovered over his keyboard. The watch. It wasn't a fitness tracker. Julian's eyes snapped open in the prison cell. She recorded the keystrokes. But that wasn't enough. The biometric scan, the retina scanner on his laptop. How did she bypass that? He thought back to the migraines. 2 months ago. He had woken up in the middle of the night. Elena was looming over him. "What are you doing?" he had mumbled, groggy from the sleeping pills he took. "Shh," she had whispered, holding her phone up. "There was a mosquito on your face. I didn't want it to bite you." The flash had gone off. He had brushed it off as her being weird. But she hadn't been taking a picture of a mosquito. She had been taking a high-resolution scan of his iris while his eyes were open in the semi-conscious state. Or perhaps she had used a specialized app. No, that was too sci-fi. Think simpler. The IID on his laptop. It had a backup, a fail-safe. If the scanner failed 3 times, it required a master password and a physical security key, a YubiKey he kept on his keychain. His keychain. The night of the gala. He had thrown his keys on the marble table. He had been drunk. He had passed out. She hadn't just left. She had come back. No, the doorman would have seen her, unless she never left the building. Julian's mind raced. The timeline. 9:30 p.m. Elena leaves the gala. 10:15 p.m. She arrives at the penthouse, allegedly, to pack. 3:00 a.m. Julian arrives home. There was a 5-hour gap. She didn't run away immediately. She went to the apartment. She waited for him to come home drunk. She waited for him to pass out. She used his physical thumbprint while he was unconscious to unlock the phone. She took the physical security key from his keychain. She performed the transfers while he was snoring in the next room. Then she planted the evidence, the messy closet, the fake struggle. But the blood Julian remembered a week ago. Elena had cut her finger while chopping vegetables. It was a deep cut. She had bled into a bowl. She had been weirdly calm about it, staring at the blood before washing it away. She saved it. The realization made Julian retch. She had been harvesting her own blood, freezing it, saving it to plant in the car. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was an engineered dismantling of his life. Elena sat in a diner booth wearing a brunette wig and thick-rimmed glasses. She looked like a graduate student, or maybe a young writer. She wasn't Elena Thorne anymore. Her passport, a masterpiece of forgery she had paid $1,000 for on the dark web, said she was Nora Gray. She opened her laptop, a brand-new air-gapped machine that had never touched Julian's Wi-Fi. She navigated to a secure banking portal. The interface was plain grey text on a black background. Account balance, 214,000 tons distributed. Status laundered, clean. She didn't smile. Smiling was for people who had won a game. She hadn't won a game. She had survived a war. She took a bite of her toast. She scrolled through the news. Thorne Capital collapses, SEC, freezes all assets. Search for body continues in Hudson River. She clicked on an article about Sophia Laurent. Mistress confesses he made me do it. Elena allowed herself a small, cold smirk. That was the master stroke. She hadn't just framed Julian. She had framed Sophia as his accomplice. She had used Julian's email, which she had access to for months, to send Sophia incriminating messages. She had planted deposits in Sophia's accounts, just enough to look like bribes, not enough to make Sophia rich. She had turned Julian's 2 allies against each other. She closed the laptop. She wasn't done yet. Julian was in prison, yes, but he was a narcissist. He would find a way to weasel out. He would hire better lawyers. He would find a loophole. She needed to ensure the nail was driven into the coffin so deep it could never be pulled out. She pulled out the burner phone. She had one final message to send. Not to the police. Not to the press. She dialed a number she had memorized from Julian's black book, the physical book he kept in a safe she wasn't supposed to know about. The phone rang twice. "Yeah," a rough voice answered. "This is regarding the shipment in Newark," Elena said, her voice dropping to a mimicry of Sophia's sultry tone. "Mr. Thorne wants to renegotiate the terms. He's feeling squeezed." "Thorne is in jail," the voice growled. "Exactly," Elena said. "And he's thinking about talking, unless you ensure he stays quiet." She hung up. The man on the other end was Salvatrucha Sal Moretti, the head of a construction union that Julian had been using to launder money for the mob. Elena knew that the FBI couldn't keep Julian in jail forever on financial crimes, but the mob. They would handle him for free if they thought he was a snitch. She stood up, left a $20 bill on the table, and walked out into the crisp autumn air. She had a flight to catch. But back in New York, the walls were closing in on Julian from sides he didn't even know existed. Julian Thorne had spent his life believing that money was a shield. It could deflect lawsuits, silence critics, and buy freedom. But in Unit 4 north of the Metropolitan Correctional Center, money was a rumor and debt was paid in blood. 3 days after Elena's call to Sal Moretti, the atmosphere around Julian changed. He felt it in the cafeteria first. The other inmates stopped jeering at him. Instead, they went silent when he walked by. It was the silence of a jungle when a predator is near. Except Julian realized with a jolt that he was the prey. He was sitting alone picking at a tray of grey meatloaf when a heavy tray slammed down opposite him. It was a man known only as the Butcher, an enforcer for the Moretti crime family, serving life without parole. He didn't look at Julian. He looked at the wall. "Sal sends his regards," the Butcher whispered. Julian's fork clattered to the table. I didn't say anything. I'm not talking to the feds." "Sal heard you were looking for a deal," the Butcher said, finally turning his dead shark-like eyes onto Julian. "He heard you were going to trade the union construction contracts for a lighter sentence on the wife thing." "That's a lie," Julian hissed, sweat beading on his forehead. "My wife set me up. I don't know who told Sal that." "But doesn't matter." The Butcher interrupted. He slid a small, folded piece of paper across the table. "You have 24 hours to plead guilty to everything. The fraud, the murder, all of it. You go away for life, you keep your mouth shut, and you live. You try to fight it, you try to cut a deal." The Butcher made a slicing motion across his neck. "Enjoy your lunch, Mr. Thorne." Julian stared at the paper. It was a picture of his elderly mother in her nursing home in Florida. Taken yesterday. The blood drained from Julian's face. Elena didn't just freeze his assets. She had weaponized his criminal associates against him. She knew he had no way to contact Sal to explain. She knew Sal was paranoid. She had backed Julian into a corner where the only way to save his life and his mother's was to accept life in prison for a murder he didn't commit. That afternoon, Julian met with his public defender, Mr. Klein. "I want to take the plea," Julian said, his voice trembling. Klein looked shocked. "Julian, are you sure the evidence on the murder is circumstantial? We could beat the homicide charge. We could get it down to manslaughter, maybe 10 years. "No!" Julian screamed, checking the door of the interview room. "No trials, no press. I want to plead guilty to first-degree murder and grand larceny, today, right now." "But why?" Klein asked, baffled. Because I want to live, Julian whispered, putting his head in his hands. The irony tasted like ash in his mouth. He was a billionaire genius who could predict market crashes, yet he had been checkmated by a woman whose favorite hobby was knitting. He was going to prison for killing a woman who was currently breathing free air just to stop a mobster from killing him for a snitch he hadn't committed. It was the perfect trap. The morning of the sentencing, the sky over Manhattan was a bruised purple, heavy with a coming storm that refused to break. Inside the federal district court, the air was recycled and stale, carrying the faint metallic scent of floor wax and nervous sweat. Julian Thorne sat at the defendant's table, his hands folded on the polished mahogany. To the casual observer, he looked defeated, a man crushed by the weight of his crimes. His shoulders were slumped. His expensive suit hung loosely on a frame that had lost 15 pounds in 3 weeks of solitary confinement. But internally, Julian's mind was racing with the frantic, calculated energy of a rat navigating a maze. He wasn't defeated. He was surviving. He glanced at the gallery behind him. It was packed. Reporters, former employees, curious onlookers, they were all there to see the King of Wall Street fall. But Julian was looking for only one face. The butcher. He found him in the back row. The mob enforcer was wearing a cheap suit that strained at the shoulders, looking out of place among the legal clerks and journalists. The butcher caught Julian's eye and gave a nearly imperceptible nod. It was a confirmation. Take the fall. Keep your mouth shut about the union money laundering, and you live. Julian exhaled a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. He had made the deal. He would plead guilty to the murder of Eleanor Thorne. He would confess to a crime he didn't commit to save himself from a death sentence on the streets. It was the hardest trade he had ever made, but Julian Thorne was a survivor. He would go to a minimum security federal camp, keep his head down, and maybe, just maybe, in 20 years, he could appeal on grounds of ineffective counsel. "All rise!" the bailiff bellowed, his voice echoing off the high, coffered ceilings. The Honorable Justice Halloway swept into the room, his black robes billowing like storm clouds. Halloway was a hanging judge, a man who despised white-collar criminals. He took his seat and peered over his wire-rimmed glasses, his gaze landing on Julian like a physical weight. "Mr. Thorne," Halloway said, his voice dry and scratching like sandpaper, "we are here for sentencing. You have entered a plea of guilty to 1 count of first-degree murder and 24 counts of wire fraud and grand larceny. Do you stand by this plea?" Julian stood up. His legs felt heavy, as if he were wading through concrete. He licked his dry lips. "I do, Your Honor." "And do you have anything to say before this court passes sentence?" This was the moment, the performance. Julian had rehearsed this in his cell 1,000 times. He had to sound remorseful enough to satisfy the judge, but broken enough to satisfy the mob. "Your Honor," Julian began, his voice cracking perfectly. I loved my wife. But I was greedy. I was weak. The money became a sickness. When Elena found out, I panicked. I didn't mean for it to happen. It was an accident that spiraled out of control. I accept full responsibility for her death and for the financial crimes I committed. I only ask for mercy." A murmur went through the crowd. The admission. The press scribbled furiously. Justice Halloway let the silence stretch. He shuffled the papers on his bench, the sound amplified by the microphone. "Mr. Thorne," the judge said finally, "I have sat on this bench for 30 years. I have seen drug dealers, hitmen, and terrorists, but rarely have I seen a man so devoid of a soul as you. You didn't just kill your wife. You erased her. You disposed of her like she was a line item on a spreadsheet that didn't balance. And then you stole billions, destroying the livelihoods of thousands of investors to fund your escape. Julian flinched. Just get it over with, he thought. Mercy is for those who show humanity. Holloway continued, his voice rising. You have shown none. Therefore, this court shows you none. The gavel raised. Julian Thorne, I sentence you to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. You are remanded to the custody of the Bureau of Prisons immediately. Bang! The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet room. Life without parole. Julian's knees buckled slightly. He had expected 50 years, maybe 40. But life. Take him away, Holloway ordered, not even looking up as he closed the file. The bailiffs were on him instantly, their hands rough as they cuffed his wrists behind his back. The flashing cameras blinded him as he was hauled toward the side door. He looked back for the butcher, but the seat was empty. The mob had gotten what they wanted. Julian was buried. They didn't take him back to Rikers immediately. They shoved him into a temporary holding cell in the basement of the courthouse while the paperwork was processed. It was a cold, windowless, concrete box with a stainless steel toilet and a single metal bench bolted to the floor. Julian sat on the bench, staring at the graffiti scratched into the grey paint. He was in shock. Life. He would die in a cage. But at least he was alive. At least the mob wouldn't shank him in the shower. He had outsmarted death. The heavy steel door buzzed and clicked open. Julian looked up, expecting the transport officers. Instead, a small, balding man in an impeccable charcoal suit walked in. He held a leather briefcase and looked distinctly out of place in the grime of the holding cell. "Mr. Thorne?" the man asked. His accent was Swiss, precise, clipped neutral. "Who are you?" Julian croaked. "I fired my lawyers. I don't have any money left to pay you." "I am not here to represent you," the man said, stepping into the cell but careful not to touch anything. "My name is Henry Dubios. I am a solicitor with the firm of Vanguard and Associates in Zurich. I am here to execute a specific instruction left in our escrow." "Escrow?" Julian frowned. "I don't have accounts in Zurich anymore. The Fed seized everything." "This does not concern your accounts, Mr. Thorne," Dubios said. He opened his briefcase. "This concerns a package that was deposited with our firm 7 years ago, with strict instructions to be delivered to you personally only in the event of a sentencing of life imprisonment or death." Julian felt a cold prickle on the back of his neck. 7 years ago, who deposited it? Dubios didn't answer. He simply pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. It was sealed with red wax. "This is for you. My task is complete." The solicitor placed the envelope on the metal bench next to Julian, turned, and knocked on the door. The guard opened it, and the man vanished as quickly as he had appeared. Julian stared at the envelope. It looked heavy, expensive. The paper was textured linen. He reached out with his cuffed hands, his fingers trembling. He picked it up. A scent hit him. It was faint but unmistakable. Lavender and vanilla. It was Elena's perfume. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. His breath hitched in his throat. He fumbled with the wax seal, his fingernails scraping against the paper until it tore open. Inside there were 2 things, a photograph and a handwritten letter. He looked at the photograph first. It was a high-resolution print. It showed a toddler, a little boy, maybe 2 years old, sitting on a lush green lawn, laughing as he reached for a bubble floating in the air. The boy had dark curls and bright, intelligent eyes. Julian turned the photo over. On the back, in Elena's neat, cursive handwriting, was a date, August 2024. He frowned. He didn't know this child. Why was she sending him baby pictures? He unfolded the letter. The pages were covered in dense, elegant script. He began to read. My dearest Julian, if you are reading this, then you have lost. You are sitting in a cage, likely confused, likely terrified, and wondering how the quiet, mousy librarian you married managed to destroy the great Julian Thorne. You always told me that in business you have to know the history of the asset. You have to know where it came from to know what it's worth. But you never checked my history. Did you, Julian? You saw a pretty face in a library, a woman with no family, no connections, someone you could mold into the perfect silent accessory. Do you remember 2008? Do you remember a company called Vanguard Tech? Julian froze. His eyes scanned the words, his heart hammering against his ribs. Vanguard Tech. It was his first big kill. He had shorted the stock spread rumors about the CEO's mental health and drove the share price to zero. He had bought the patents for pennies on the dollar. It was the foundation of his empire. The CEO of Vanguard Tech was named Robert Vance. The letter continued. He was a good man. He was a brilliant inventor. And he was my father. He didn't just lose his company, Julian. He lost his mind. The shame you manufactured, the lies you told to the press, it broke him. I was 22 years old when I came home and found him in the garage. He had hanged himself with an extension cord because you bankrupt him. A strangled noise escaped Julian's throat. I changed my name. I dyed my hair. I created a backstory about being an orphan from Ohio. I spent 2 years studying you. I learned your schedule, your tastes, your weaknesses. I knew you liked women who were submissive women you could control. So I became her. I became Elena. I didn't marry you for love. I married you for a debt of blood. Julian's hands were shaking so violently, the paper rattled. The mouse. The woman who was afraid of thunder. The woman who asked permission to buy a dress. It was all a lie. Every second of their 7-year marriage was a performance. She had been sleeping next to the enemy, every night waiting. I waited 7 years, Julian. 7 years of listening to you brag, listening to you belittle me. I waited for you to get sloppy. And when you brought Sophia into the picture, when you started getting greedy with the offshore accounts, I knew it was time to harvest. And the money. You're probably wondering where the $2.4 billion is. You think I'm sitting on a beach somewhere with your fortune. I'm not a thief, Julian. I'm an executor of an estate. The money has been donated. All of it. I set up a specialized algorithm that distributed the funds into thousands of micropayments to the pension funds of the 3 companies you destroyed: Vanguard Tech, Horizon Medical, and Blue Steel Industries. You didn't steal that money, Julian. You gave it back. You are the most generous philanthropist in history. Thank you. Julian felt bile rise in his throat. The money was gone. Not hidden, gone. He couldn't trade it. He couldn't use it. And finally, look at the photo again. Julian looked down at the laughing boy. That is not your son. That is my nephew. My sister's son. The sister you wouldn't let me visit because family is a distraction. He is growing up in a world where he will never have to worry about money thanks to the college fund I established in your name. You are right about one thing, though. Elena Thorne is dead. She died the moment I walked out of that gala. The woman who remains is free. I have left you nothing, Julian. No money, no reputation, no freedom. And the worst part. You put yourself here. I didn't kill you. I just handed you the rope, and you, in your arrogance, tied the noose yourself. Enjoy the silence. You bought it. E. Julian dropped the letter. It fluttered to the dirty concrete floor, landing face up. The rope. The realization crashed into him like a tidal wave. She knew he would plead guilty. She knew he would be too afraid of the mob to fight the charges. She had calculated his cowardice just like he used to calculate stock trends. He wasn't a victim of bad luck. He wasn't a victim of the system. He was a victim of a 7-year-long con artist who had hated him with a precision that bordered on art. A sound started low in his chest. A laugh. But it wasn't a happy sound. It was a jagged, broken thing. She... Julian gasped, his eyes big and unseeing. She donated it. The laugh turned into a sob. Then a scream. Julian Thorne, the billionaire, the genius, the predator, threw himself against the steel bars of the holding cell. He screamed until his voice gave out. He screamed until the guards came running, batons drawn, shouting for him to get back. But Julian didn't hear them. All he could hear was the phantom sound of a woman's soft, submissive voice whispering in his ear from 1,000 miles away. Smile, Julian. You're on camera. He slid down the wall, curling into a ball on the cold floor, the letter lying just out of reach. The gilded cage had shut, and for the first time he realized he wasn't the master of the house. He was just the pet that had been put down. 5 years later. The sun over the Amalfi Coast didn't just shine. It felt like a physical weight, a warm blanket of gold that settled over the terraced cliffs and the sparkling expanse of the Tyrrhenian Sea. The air was thick with the scent of wild lemons, dried sage, and the salt spray crashing against the rocks 1,000 feet below. In the sleepy village of Ravello, life moved at a pace that Julian Thorne would have found maddening. There were no tickers tape, no high-frequency trading algorithms, no urgent emails. There was only the slow, rhythmic tolling of the church bells and the murmur of conversation in the piazza. Sitting at a small wrought-iron table outside Café di Napoli was a woman the locals knew as Miss Rosie. She looked nothing like the pale, trembling creature who had once stood on red carpets in New York City, clutching a billionaire's arm for balance. Her hair, once a chemically straightened blonde, was now cut into a sharp, chic bob and dyed a deep, warm chestnut. Her skin was tanned from hours spent tending to the small olive grove behind her rented cottage. She wore a simple linen dress and leather sandals, an outfit that cost less than a single pair of socks she used to own as Elena Thorne. But the most striking difference was her eyes. They were no longer empty. They were sharp, clear, and unburdened. Un caffè, Signora Rossi, the waiter, an elderly man named Marco, asked as he wiped down her table. Si, grazie, Marco. She smiled. It was a genuine smile, one that crinkled the corners of her eyes. And the international papers, if you have them. Marco nodded and returned with a porcelain cup and a folded copy of the International Herald Tribune. Ms. Rossi Elena took a sip of the dark, bitter espresso. She didn't need the caffeine to wake up anymore. She slept soundly every night, a luxury she hadn't known for 7 years. She opened the newspaper, scanning the headlines. Politics in London, a merger in Tokyo, a climate summit in Paris. The world kept turning indifferent to the dramas of individual men. Then she found it. It was a small column on page 14, buried beneath an advertisement. treatment for luxury watches. Former hedge fund mogul hospitalized after prison attack. Elena adjusted her sunglasses and read the text. Julian Thorne. 50 serving a life sentence without parole at the ADX Florence Supermax facility remains in critical condition following an altercation in the exercise yard yesterday. Thorne, once one of Wall Street's most powerful figures, has reportedly been the target of multiple assaults since his incarceration 5 years ago. Prison psychologists note that Thorne suffers from severe paranoia and refuses to speak to legal counsel, often claiming he is being watched by ghosts. Elena lowered the paper. She stared out at the blue horizon, where the sea met the sky in a seamless line. She tried to summon a feeling of guilt. She searched her conscience for a flicker of remorse for the man who was currently bleeding in a prison infirmary, alone, broken, and terrified. She felt nothing. Or rather, she felt balance. For 7 years, Julian had made her life a prison. He had isolated her, tracked her movements, controlled her finances, and erased her identity. He had built a golden key and told her she should be grateful for the bars. He had driven her father to suicide for profit and laughed about it over scotch. She hadn't killed him. She hadn't hired a hitman. She had simply held up a mirror. She had used his own weapons against him. His greed, his arrogance, and his absolute certainty that he was the smartest person in the room. Julian believed he was a shark in an ocean of minnows. He never stopped to consider that the ocean itself could turn against him. The money, the $2.4 billion, was gone. She hadn't kept a dime of the stolen funds. It had taken her months to write the code, but she had successfully funneled every cent into the pension funds of the companies Julian had destroyed. The iron workers in Ohio, the tech developers in Austin, the medical researchers in Boston, they had all received anonymous checks, adjustments to their accounts. Justice wasn't about punishment. It was about restoration. Elena reached into her tote bag and pulled out a small leather-bound book. It was a sketchbook. She opened it to a fresh page. With a piece of charcoal, she began to draw the view before her. The cliffs, the sea, the lemon trees. Her hand was steady. A shadow fell over her table. She looked up, startled. It was a young backpacker lost holding a map. "Excuse me," he said in English. "Do you know the way to the Villa Simbrone?" Elena looked at him. He was young, American, full of energy. "Yes," she said, her voice soft but strong. "You go up the stairs behind the church, turn left at the bakery, and keep climbing. The view from the top is worth the walk." "Thanks," he grinned. "You have a great accent. Are you American?" Elena paused. She thought about the penthouse on Park Avenue. She thought about the galas, the flashes, the fear. She thought about the woman named Elena Thorne, who had died that night on the George Washington Bridge. "No," she said, turning back to her drawing, the charcoal scratching pleasantly against the paper. "I used to be. Now I'm just a local." The boy nodded and ran off up the stairs. Elena watched him go. A cool breeze blew in from the sea, rustling the pages of the newspaper where Julian's tragedy was printed in black and white ink that would fade by tomorrow. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the sweet air of freedom. The gilded cage was empty. The door was open. And the bird hadn't just flown. She had learned to soar. "Karma," she whispered to the wind. And for the first time in her life, the wind didn't whisper back. It just blew wild and free, carrying her secrets out to the endless blue sea. And that brings us to the end of the story of Julian and Elena Thorne. In the end, Julian lost everything, not because he wasn't smart, but because he underestimated the quiet woman standing in his shadow. Elena proved that the most powerful revenge isn't violence, It's patience. She waited, she planned, and she let Julian's own nature be his downfall. Now I have a question for you guys. Do you think Elena was right to keep the money for the victims, or should she have turned it in to the authorities? And was life in prison a fair punishment for Julian, considering he didn't actually kill her? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I love reading your theories. If you enjoyed this roller coaster of a story, please hit that like button, share this video with a friend who loves drama, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a new story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.